Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, and welcome back to Perspective. We are looking at the Islamic world in modern times. We are trying to look at how Islam have been alienated, how Islam have been attacked, how Islam have been challenged, and the responses of the Muslims, and the point of departure, or the embarkment of the attack on Islam really started, or the challenges started from the Renaissance period, Napoleon and the invasion of the Islamic countries, and the responses of different types of Muslim thinkers in order to really contain Islam for themselves and also for their state or for their communities, and how they responded to it. So we reached to a point that we were talking about how these Sufi groups started coming and influencing their northern parts of Africa in order to really face the challenges that they are facing. So we see a continuous struggle by Islam, by Muslim thinkers, in order that when it's facing this modern world. Now, in the recent era, we tend to see that in addition to these sort of three different groups that we have explained in the first part of the program, we see a reign of revivalism, to revive Islam. That started. However, the West, they tend to call this as a wave of fundamentalism, depending on the school of thought, depending on the approach. We do see these trends. For example, Maulana Maududi and the Salafiyya movement, for example. Then you have the Jamaatul Islami, the Ikhwan in Egypt, for instance. All of these movements, they are trying to really revive, trying to really contain the Islamic values, the Islamic ethos, and then you have the similar movement that took place by Imam Khomeini, for example, the revolution. Once again, it was a revival of that Shia Islamic thought, in order, when it is challenged by the Shah, by Western values, and we see that how the revolution was successful and how they answered it, and how this also inspired not only Shia Muslims, but also those who were Muslims, the Islamic Revolution of Iran. So this is where we have reached in terms of now there's a new trend. Once again, we see under the name of Khilafat, for example, that the Islamic world sees today, which is once again fundamentalism. Now, which is really against the teachings of Islam, to be more precise and more clear, so that it's not misquoted, what we see in regards to the Khalifa, for example. But what I'm trying to do here is trying to point out to the historical development of these challenges, and where it started, and how the Muslims responded to these challenges, whether they be in Pakistan, for example, Allama Maududi, who established Jamaat Islamiyya in Pakistan, or whether that be the Salafiyya movement associated with Rashid Rida, for example, which had a strong following in Egypt and Syria, or for example, you have the followers of Imam Khomeini in Lebanon and in Iraq and Syria and stuff, and certain parts of the world as well. So you have these different thinkers, different scholars trying to really respond to the modern challenges, to the Western influences. And today as well, we tend to see the same thing, that with all of these. So you have these responses, or you have these reactions to 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 the Islamic world and how they react. Now, what would have been the decent or the more wise approach in order to really face these challenges? Because see, when we are talking about Islam is facing challenges, it faces the social challenge, it faces the political challenge, it faces the economical challenge, it faces the cultural challenge, it faces the religious challenge, it faces the educational challenge, because the Western values, the Western culture, the Western education system, the Western modern sciences, for example, Western art and all which we have discussed earlier, they tend to be more secular. They tend to not have the element of providing room and place for traditional thought, for religious thought. So therefore, we see this sort of reactions taking place. Now, when we also look at the present era, the present situation, it has become more political as well. For example, the Western interest in the region right now, the Western interest in promoting, in training certain of the well-known terrorists or who became terrorists with the naivety, if you want to call, or if you want to give the benefit of doubt to the West. But this naivety was purely a ghaflat, a forgetfulness of theirs, because their interest kind of blinded them and perhaps gave them the wrong decision making and choosing the wrong people in order that they have their influence in the region, such as Saddam Hussein, for example, such as Osama bin Laden, for example, such as the Baghdadi that we have today. All of these were known to be in the good books of America, of the West, of British, of Europe, right? And now, for example, if you look at Saudi Arabia, for instance, now. So now you have this miscalculation. You have this turning their face to other side, while allowing the Saudis, or while allowing the certain fundamental groups, certain terrorist groups, under the pretext of regime change, because the present regime in a particular state or a country does not really support the Western bloc, but it rather support the Eastern bloc. Dividing into these blocks, the communism, the Eastern bloc is with Russia, or the Western bloc is with America. It became too crucial and complex. While it is complex in its own sort of universe, you have Islam under attack, Islam facing that challenge. Because regardless of what the West thinks, Islam plays a major role in the region. Islam is a major force in the region. Islam is very valuable. Islam is that energy, that driving force for all Muslims today. So now the point is that how you would approach this issue, and how you would curtail the fundamental or the terroristical elements that is there. From one side, we see that the West doesn't like to have the Iranian influence, because for them the Iranian or the Shia Islamic influence is considered to be fundamental, for example. But for the West, anything that has to do with religion, anything, regardless of what religion, it doesn't have a place in the Western politics. It will be considered as against their interest, because their system of governance is based upon the secular principles. So this is what we are seeing today as a challenge. Now, what is the approach, the present approach, and what is required? It seems that if our attention to the ethos, to the akhlaqi, to the ethical, to the philosophical teachings of Islam, and we base our understanding and our practices on that, then there is room for social justice. Then there is room that Islam would be able to face these challenges and respond to it. There is a requirement of engaging the Western thinkers, the Western sort of influences, and engaging it and trying to influence it through ethical principles, on ethical grounds, because ethics is a common topic. Ethics is something common amongst the West and also among the Muslims as well. So if we come on that ethical ground, we make that as the criteria, and based on ethics, on akhlaq, we try to move forward. Based on these ethical principles, we try to resolve the issues and attend to the needs of the people and have a social justice and have a reform. That's what Islam really wants. If there be a political solution needed, for example, in the Middle East, as we look at it, that has been in such a turmoil for the longest period of time, then it requires self-respect of both parties, respecting each other, coming on a table and discussing it and trying to resolve this issue. But unfortunately, we don't see that. The whole Middle East have been destabilized. People who have visited Syria, was at a time was very peaceful country, very polished people, very good individuals, very modern, if you want to call, but at the same time, having respect for religion, and religion was practiced. But today it has been completely destabilized, just because of that Eastern Bloc or Western Bloc, just because of that Islamic revivalism, for example, for those who want to and they are influenced by it, or the Syrian government is influenced by the Islamic revivalism, for instance, which is against the Western interest, or which is against some of those Salafi movements that are there in Saudi Arabia, for example, right? So it has become a mess. So that is what it is needed right now, that those ethical grounds and engaging on those principles. The loss of life that we see, this is not right. Again, these are the crimes against humanity. There should be some ethos and ethical principles practiced by the governments, practiced by by the leadership of the West. Being fair trade, justice. All of these things are quite important to really pay attention to. Now, we are moving forward, so we just pointed out to the present situation and how Islam have faced these challenges and how it has been influenced, and every atom within the Islamic body have been challenged and attacked in a way. Like I said, from the economical, from the cultural, from the educational, from the social, from the political, to the extent of the lifestyle the people have, as we talked about art and architecture, the buildings, and how one should really live, how one should really, carry oneself, the clothing that one should wear. So all of these things are nothing but challenge, right, that the Muslims are facing and the Islam is facing. And the response, and Islam have remained. Islam have really remained in the West, remained and faced all of these challenges. So it is required that we kind of have that ethical, philosophical and mystical, from a more of an irfani point of view, approaching these things, looking at the transcendental unity that exists, in terms of the commonality, in terms of the faith, and then taking one thing at a time and approaching these issues by expanding the common grounds that exist with the West and the East as well. Now we are moving towards the second part of our discussion, which is religion in the modern West itself. What is the value of religion? What is religion? Despite the extensive contact the Muslims have had and continue to have with the Western world since the last century, there has been very little study carried out by them about religion in the West. What is religion? It is very much required that we investigate, that we look into. These are the expanding of these common grounds, the Christian faith, the interfaith, and engaging on these common grounds to really see, because the religion have faced similar consequences that Islam is facing today. The religion have been attacked in the similar fashion even before Islam was here, right? They wanted to burn Galileo when Galileo discovered that the earth is the center. The earth is not the center, but the sun is the center, and the earth is revolving around the sun. It is at a time they wanted to burn him because the power was in the hands of the religious class. Now we see that what happened after that. Now the religion have been marginalized, because religion or the religious approach to knowledge and to science was very different. The Christian approach to science was very different, right? To education was very different. But Islam has a very different approach to these sciences, as we had already discussed in regards to the discoveries and the contributions of the Muslim scholars to astronomy, to astrology, to geography, to science, to mathematics. So Islam have a very different approach to these sciences that are there, right? Islam appreciates the dedication and the sincerity, regardless of that person who have dedicated his life for cancer research, for example, right? For space expedition, for research in space, for NASA, these scientists who are really working, right? So Islam have a very different approach to these realities. But what is required is that a study, and to take that leading role as a Muslim and as Islam, and support the religious minority, I would say, right? Religion which has become a practice of minority, compared to what we see in the West, right? So that is something that is needed. I think we will look at this in our next program, inshallah, in more detail, that what is religion in the modern West. Then we will look at the modern Western philosophy and the different schools of thought, how these Western philosophers have influenced the West, what it really went down, and which philosopher influenced the most, the scientists, for example, and how they influence. Now Western model is purely based upon the Darwinist model. Why it is Darwinist model and where are the flaws in the Darwinist model. This is something that we really need to look at it, and inshallah we will do that in our next program. Thank you very much for joining us. We will see you next week again. غفر الله لنا ولكم Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.